now. All right.
Ready to go?
So folks, this is BboyTech performance and walkthrough. Nice.
That's awesome.
That was amazing.
Awesome, Corey.
Word. Thank you. Let's see. So I'll just talk through some of what I have set up here. So what I've noticed and what definitely helped me to be able to bring my studio out, perform out, is being able to have a device like the Force that I can grab clips of what I'm doing on my modular rig. Let's see. So you can kind of see it's tucked away over here, but obviously I'm not taking an 18U case out, right? Although sometimes I feel like I want to, but the reality is I've never had everything patched at once anyway. So what was important for me was to be able to do clips and record audio tracks. And so the dope thing about this is that I'm composing on this. So when I use MIDI or when I use CV or whatever I'm using, I'll have those tracks. So I'll have CV tracks. If some of you all use Ableton, you'll know, you have a MIDI track, you have an audio track. So it's the same thing with the Force. So I'll have CV tracks, MIDI tracks, and audio tracks here. And so I used to, in the beginning, when I would kind of make beats, each one of these rows is a different beat or either a derivative of the previous. So I could sequence things and live arrange. And I used to delete the MIDI tracks and delete the CV tracks and then save that and, arrange the whole thing. If you go down, those are all tracks. And so that's how I set up my projects to perform. I'm just performing off the grid, like so. So I don't delete the CV tracks and MIDI tracks anymore, because then what that allows me to do, like this CV bit. So this is the audio track.
Wait, Corey, we couldn't hear the sentence you just said.
Okay, so there's CV here. I'll show you what I do. So I've arranged this where typically my tracks will start out with just some melodic or noise stuff, and then I'll go into the beat and the bass and all of that stuff that I've added in. But I also leave the CV track there because then I could bring a small skiff out like this one, like this guy right here. It's a 62 HP skiff. Hold on a second. There, so it's at least a little bit more in focus. But so I'll bring the smallest skiff out, and then I'll route the CV from the track that I've made to the voice that I have in my skiff. And I'll also do some stuff like record bits of that to Morphogene. So I'm typically manipulating live, modular audio, with CV coming to like the surface in this case. And I'll turn that down a bit. And then also manipulating pre-recorded reels or reels that I record live while performing. But I'll have the loops and the CV of everything else. So it's still very much modular music and mod bap music, but I just have more control over the consistency of what I play back. So for instance, like in this case, this is a reel that's on Morphogene. But obviously if I do sound on sound with Morphogene, should be there. Let's see. Go. So what you're hearing right now, see, I can take this filter. I keep performance effects on both. So I obviously using the performer here, but I also have like a DJ sort of setup here where I can do kill switches. I can kill low frequency, mid frequency, and high frequency, right? But I also have a low pass filter with resonance here. So any of the audio that's coming off, of course, can be controlled, and you can still hear the CV that's coming out of here. This CV melody is coming out of here, hitting the surface and going through these effects. which is another performer in the 62 HP skiff over here. Right, so I can then go sound on sound and start to bring in the reels that are on there. And I'll just latch on the reverb so that that's on. So now you kind of have this sort of, I guess this sort of ambient sort of situation happen, and then I can start to bring in, and remember I said that usually the way I set up my projects is, that I'll have the first track or the first scene will be melodic information. And I can play with that with the performer. Then go to the next scene. And here, I'll solo out some of that stuff. So it's basically, the drums come from the performer. So I have all of that stuff here. And then I have this is the CV there. Where's the rest of the stuff? So that's part of the melodic stuff, and then I have the bass line. And one of the things that I like to do with this is, because obviously it's fun to perform just the beat, you know, with a little bit of bass, I'll then start to mess with delay. And the delay has, let's see. So with the performer, you have your wet dry, is the first knob. Then you have the time, and it's a Doppler delay, because I like this sort of, to hear the time kind of change immediately. And then you have feedback. Now, when I was developing the performer, I realized that the feedback can get so crazy. So we decided to put a filter as the fourth knob. So it's a DJ filter where it's a low pass on one side and a high pass on the other side. So when you're holding down that delay, you can play with any of these parameters. Time, feedback, high pass, low pass. So this gives me a lot of options to be able to, you know, just live arrange and perform. And I'll typically go to a beat repeat when it's time to drop to a different part. So the bass line is more drony than just like notes, right? Then now the ARP comes in. And so that's all sort of pre-recorded stuff. However, I still have my CD going to surface, so I can always bring that volume up on the side here. And then one of the little tricks that I use, you can see all the squares here. You can see all the squares here. Obviously, this is the bridge. So that was scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and scene 4. I know that that's the same track because most of the squares there, for lack of a better term. But the next track, this one here, it only has 2 squares there. That's a little telltale sign for me to get ready to go to the next track so I could do some other stuff. The reason I know that's going to be the next track is because with 2 squares, it means I'm dropping down to 1 or 2 elements, and that's typically an intro. Right, but it won't sound as abrupt because I'll typically be doing something here. Or I'll start to kind of fade in these other things here to kind of distract you a bit. fade that back out. Right. So, and then all of this has all been done with modular or some combination of synthesizers or something. And so this allows me to be able to take a much smaller setup out and perform.
Very cool. Just a couple of things. So with the Surface, so now that gives you the opportunity to you could swap that voice out with any voice.
Yeah.
And you stay in key with everything else that you previously recorded because you're still using the CV off the Force.
Yeah, and I do that kind of often too. So and don't get me wrong. I mean, because there's a certain amount of dissonance that I actually enjoy. You know what I mean? And I'm not a trained musician, so sometimes it's just like I go by ear. Even if it's dissonant and I enjoy it, I'm gonna leave it, right? But I will go through, if I know I'm gonna do this set, like for today, I knew that this was a set that I had. I think I performed the set in 2019 somewhere or another. So I pulled this up and I was like, I know I still have CV tracks in there, so that'll be perfect way to kind of demonstrate how I perform. And obviously, I didn't have the Surface at that time. So I think, hell, don't get me lying. I think I was using Plats, maybe. Yeah, it had to be Plats because I have the little micro Plats. And I knew that I would have to kind of tune things and play around with it. So I literally went through all of these tracks and just kind of messed around with Surface until I got it kind of in the ballpark. Then I recorded some other melodies of the Surface into Performer. So like every time the set may be a little different, but overall it's the same because of what's on the Force. But still, because I want to bring, some live modular out with me, then I'm kind of adding little elements. So if I was to go out next week and perform this set, it would probably sound a little different because of the Eurorack portion of it would be something that I will have just recorded last night or, you know what I mean, or set up the night before. But it still helps me to be able to have a recallable set that I can go back to. And then there's times that I'll have a set like this that I've worked on for like a week or two. And then just before the show, I'll be like, you know what? I feel like as I go through this set, there's not enough dynamics. So I want to drop out drums and do more melodic stuff, or I want to add an intro track that's just melodic or ambient, or outro track, or even I'll take voice samples sometimes too and add those in there. So, but yeah, I can swap out anything in my rack and kind of add a whole different flair to this sort of pre-recorded set.
This is dope. So one of the things I just want to point out to everybody is just like thinking about how you want to play. Some like the key thing I'm grabbing from this setup, which makes it pretty amazing, is that you can save your sets and go back and play them again. And for those who don't want to perform, and this is, for a studio thing, you can go back and you can record these things or keep adding to them. Like how you would, like if you were just working in a DAW and you have like your project and maybe you just go back like a month later or what have you and decide you want to continue to work on it. I like that because now you have this opportunity where you can go back and either change things, swap out modules, like voices, or even combine maybe another piece and do save as, right, into a new project, and then maybe keep some of that and start writing something new for a different show. That's pretty dope.
Yeah, it gives a lot of flexibility. And I've started to see people do that also in the rack. I mean, I think the thank God for 1010, it seems that they bring that sort of workflow into the rack that you can easily do that sort of thing. But for me, I mean, I'm all about modular beats, mod bap, and you know what I mean, the combination of boom bap and Eurorack synthesis and modular synthesis and stuff. So for me, the aesthetic of making beats has to come from something like this. Like I have to drum out beats this way, and it makes it easy that this has 4 CV out, plus it has MIDI IO through. And so the way I have things routed is I have an Apollo and an Apollo 8 plus an Audio Fuse 8 pre. So all of my synths over there are going into the Audio Fuse 8 pre. Then that's going through ADAT into my Apollo. And I know it's kind of like, well, you only got a couple cents over there. But up until a couple of weeks ago, I had the whole wall back behind me was filled with synths. So all of that stuff will be going into my Audio Fuse 8 pre. Then that goes through ADAT into my Apollo. And my Eurorack case also has a mixer in it. And I just take the stereo out and that goes into the Apollo. So every single thing in my studio that I'm actually using, let me switch here. These two white wires here, white cables, that is an output from the Apollo into the Force. So every single thing that I'm using at the moment is coming back into the Force. I'm never using a DAW. I don't really, DAWless. I never think of it like that. I just use the tool that I'm comfortable using. So everything in the studio and everything out of the Apollo comes back into here. So I can go to menu, sampler, just like I'm talking now, and you see the level. I could just sample that and put it on a pad and, re-trigger it into the set. Or I can also just, if I go back here, I can enable one of the audio tracks and just, maybe mute everything else. I just want the bass line. Then I can just come over here, set up that and just play the bass line. Right. Or, okay, now I want to play chords on that. I'll just set it up to record it. And the same thing with anything coming off of the Eurorack. So it's just convenience. Like for me, it had to be very, very convenient. Yeah, go for it.
Stu.
There we go. There's the unmute. So just so I understand, the what's coming out of your Apollo looks like the main out of the Apollo. Is the Akai automatically splitting the Apollo output into individual tracks? In other words, you're sending Moog 1, Eurorack, and another synth into the Apollo. When it comes into the Akai, what does that look like? In other words, is it coming in as separate tracks that you can then manipulate, kind of DAW style? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So basically, what I was going to share my screen, but I don't think I can. Basically, what I do is I kind of have the Apollo on the screen like a virtual mixer, right? Mm-hmm. And I have cues set up. So I have Q1 and Q2. Go.
I made it so you could share in case you wanted to. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me see if I can share this. Here. So you'll see this now. This is obviously track 1. Can you see the screen?
Yeah. What am I looking at though? Is what is this? This
is the console of the UAD Apollo 8.
Oh, the Apollo console.
This is the Apollo console. Okay. And so if you look down here, up until last week, all of this was labeled for what's coming through it. So what I have here is the 1, that is the Moog 1, and then the Hydra, they're labeled. So if I play them, and here's the 1. And if I play the Eurorack, that's 5 and 6. Right. So if you look here, I have cues set up. So this cue is actually, let me move this over a little bit. I have cues set up. So this is just a cue mix that runs out to line 5 and 6, which again are the 2 white cables coming into the Force.
Yeah.
So anything that I want to record right then, I can do a couple things. I can say, okay, I don't want this one. So I can either turn the cue mix down or mute that one, mute the other one. So everything will continue to play. But the only thing that will be recorded into the Force is whatever's coming through the cue mix. And I can control that.
Which is whatever you tell it.
Exactly.
Got it. Very cool.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. Very cool.
Oh, let me go here.
Then you can go back in and just make specific audio channels to save those clips, those audio clips in your force.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
Can you just for the signal flow, can you walk us through two signal flows? One, right, continue the one with you're in the studio, you routed and just like talk about what you have in the palette case. And then one, like if you were to unpack that and now now you come to my house, for example, to perform or something. And then you have like your palette case and your force, just so people can hear the two differences of the audio
Okay.
routing.
Yeah.
With
So
each module, I guess.
all right. So let's see. Play. So I'm going to turn up the palette. Right now I'm on Morphogene, and I just have this little clip going backwards. And sometimes I'll throw CV in it so that I can kind of scrub through the clip. Right, so that's all Morphogene right now, but if I go sound on sound, this is all the surface. It's obviously a very simple sort of thing, but I can also throw a delay and kind of spice that up a little bit.
What's the final output module? So are you going like, is there an output module and then you're sending it into the performer? Is that like on the far right, I guess? Like,
yeah, so
or is
this, on this side, I'll tell you everything that I have here. Okay. So on this side, I have Mutant Brain. There's a different setup that I may do that will require me to have MIDI directly in this case. So I have Mutant Brain on this side. Next to that is the surface. Next to that is Morphogene. And then next to that is a filter. And then next to that is the performer. And this kind of, I mix this up. It could change up almost any time, but I kind of like the idea. One of my favorite setups here is taking Mutant Brain out and then just having the surface into Data Brain or into Data Bender into performer and out. And then if that's the case, now typically if I'm performing, back to these two cables here, these two white cables, that's the input into the force. So typically if I'm out performing and there's melodic elements and things that I want to be heard on the skiff, which there is now, I have it routed a little bit differently, but if I was performing live, I would take the output of this skiff and run it into the input of the force and then turn on monitoring inside the force. And so that way, everything is just coming out of the force. And then also the additional to that, so you have the Eurorack case going into the force and the output of the force going to this performer for my performance effects over the entire mix. And then that would go out to the house. And then so that way you have these things like this stuff here that's just on the clip or the scene that I can launch, and all that stuff is in there. And so while all this stuff is happening, I can kind of control the volume on the skiff. And also it simplifies it that that'll be going through the force, and the force goes into this performer and the performer out. That way it's still just stereo out, and I don't have to give any sound man any headaches. You know what I'm saying? So everything just ends up routed, through the force.
And just to control for the volume, so you have it running through, so you have the performer, your final output to the house is out of the performer and then into, what is that, like a 4MS? What is that?
This one is, I never can say the name, Sono Ibitus.
Oh, the noise engineering.
So yeah, let's look at that again. So I have two final outputs, and quite frankly, I don't necessarily, and we'll just use this kind of weird angle right now. So this is one case with the performer. This is my 62 HP skiff with the performer. So this one has an output module that is the what I say, Sonos Habitas.
The noise engineering.
Yeah, the noise
Yeah, right. The
engineering
noise
unit.
engineering output. Right.
So yeah, I have that because it has quarter-inch out, and then I could just run these 1/8 inch and the patch cables in, and it has quarter-inch out, so that's good. So I actually split that and send that where I want to sit it when I'm in the studio. But on the Force here, and now here's the thing: the Force can take line level. I mean, not the Force. The Performer can take line level or Euro rack level. Really doesn't matter. Throw it anything, it works it out. But the one thing that I want is a volume knob. So I got these output modules. So in this particular case, this 20 HP case, I have the Performer and the 4MS Listen IO because it gives me a volume knob that I can do more control with, right? So no matter how I'm routed, I want to be able to control that just without, I want to set the Force's volume, and then I want to be able to control the skiffs that have the input coming in, right? Because anything that's coming out of the 62 HP case is going into the Force somehow. And so I want a volume control there, which gives me the ability to fade things in and out. And then, Force goes into this little performance performance effect skiff. And I have that Listen IO there for that volume so that I can, adjust it to taste to whatever it's going to. Right. And then this has the cool thing about the 4MS Listen IO is that it has meters, right? The LED meters. So, I can kind of, to tell you the truth, I've often ignored the red. But I figured I shouldn't do that.
If you ain't redlining, you ain't headlining.
There was a song that said you must be out of your head if your system ain't up to the red, and so I kind of live by that. Right. But I realized that's not very gentleman-like in every setup, right? So I want to be able to monitor those levels and adjust accordingly, play to whatever the audience is. So anyway, yeah, I have both of those output modules only because I like the fact that this has a meter and a volume knob, and that one has a volume knob, because you could easily just go straight out of Performer and be fine. But I just want that final control. And it really does provide quite a bit of flexibility for whatever the situation is.
Nice. So basically you could throw the Performer, the palette case, and now the new little case that you can just throw all that in your bag.
Yep.
Yeah. Nice.
And I just throw that all in the bag, and it actually works out pretty well because, there was a point, this, Travarsi, I was bringing out way too much stuff, yo. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to bring out even more than that at one point because I have an MPC X over here that has 8 CV out. And what my dream was to perform with an MPC X and the Force with a mixer in between, like literally just DJ style with these two machines and a rack, a Euro rack case going across. And then I started thinking about who's going to carry all that shit? Not me. And it's my stuff. So I started figuring out how to pare things down, which, because I was going out with the Force, I was going out with the SP404, and I was going out with a 104.6U case. And it's just a lot of stuff to have and carry around. And it just wasn't practical. So it also kind of, part of that whole realization started to spark my mind about, one day I put the SP404 on Instagram and said, this should be a module. And I deleted it and was like, why don't you just make it? Take that down before somebody else does.
Right. Yeah, I remember.
And so that kind of that whole idea of wanting to perform out and the idea of performing and how I wanted to perform is what sparked the idea for the Performer. And the idea of taking less gear out. And so that's kind of how all that came together.
Two things, Corey, I'd like to have you share with the group is, we come from a place, especially over this past year and a half, and some of them are new to performing. Mm-hmm. And we're coming from a place of being able to be in the studio, like you said, and utilize all the tools, you know, and now we're coming to a period where we can think about perhaps leaving the house or performing out, or at least going to some friend's house, you know, and so, and playing shows. And I always talk about, you know, thinking about that, you know, and like you said, like paring down what you're bringing, but talk about scratching that itch, meaning like knowing like you can't do everything. You know, playing live, it's a lot of plates to be spinning. So how do you scratch that itch, meaning like live versus recorded versus like,
well,
how you
see,
came to that?
for me, that's why the Force is so important for me, because it's my studio tool and it's my live tool. And not only is it all of that, but it allows me to bring everything together. So that whole routing that I just explained to you about with the going into the Apollo and all of that stuff, that makes it very easy for me to, like, I don't know what I would do if I had to think about how do I translate all of this stuff live on stage if I didn't have a way for it to be routed the way it all is. And, you know, the headache of that I used to have of switching things all the time, not really having enough inputs and not having things midied up and a way to easily get CV in and out of one of the cases. If I didn't have those things, and over time, I've kind of learned that, like, yo, that big 18 HP case is just a storage unit if you don't put, you know, something like poly N, poly 2 into it. You know what I mean? And then another thing that's cool, I guess it comes down to the Force for me, because unlike, it's similar to Ableton in the sense that you have Ableton Push, and you could bring up a project in Ableton and push and just kind of drop through scenes and perform it. So I'm doing the same thing, but I don't have to bring a computer with me. Right. And so that was the key when people were starting to use Ableton a lot, is they were like, yo, I could bring everything that I use because it's all in my computer. It's all at Ableton. And like I said, I've never wanted to bring a computer to perform. I remember, for those who don't know, like I've been an MC for many, 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 many years. But over the last few years, I've gotten much more into making music than writing rhymes and recording rhymes. And I remember bringing laptops out with me so that I could record the set of me and my band or me and my DJ whenever we would do sets. And that was annoying because you need an audio interface. And then so it was kind of like, literally, I'm not playing one instrument. I'm not the DJ. I don't want to carry anything. So that was kind of my philosophy at that point. I decided I didn't want to take a computer at all anywhere, you know, and being IT, yo, who really wants to do that? I don't want to do that. I want to live my life away from IT, literally being away from IT. So my thing is, if I didn't have the Force, and I was fortunate enough that I've had a relationship with Akai for a long time, and I've done testing for a few different devices. And there was a point just before the Force came out, and they sent me the Force, and partly because of the way I worked with Eurorack doing ModBap. And they were like, yo, send this to him. So, you know, I'm part of the testing team. So when I got this, and I have my MPCX, which is on the shelf over here, but when I got the Force, I literally, like, the world opened up, like, boom. Like, I didn't use anything else since then. And that was a few months before the release. So I've just been using that. The way I pare down everything is just by being able to work in the studio the same way I would perform, right? So the same device that I use to perform or to compose, once I'm done composing beat after beat after beat after beat after beat, I know that, like, for instance, I'll play this again. That's the full beat. That's the drums. That's CD. You know, other CD audio. So the CD track created this thing. Then that's the bass. Then we have, you know, these other elements. Now that's, for that particular track, that's pretty much everything. But then I went and I copied that scene 4 times and made different arrangements out of the scene. So I could just drop down through this from the start. And then other elements start to come in. The bass may change on the next one. And then we may bring in an arpeggiator. So the relevance of me saying that is that I may make beat after beat after beat after beat, and then I start to think about how am I going to perform this? And so I'll go back through there and I'll say, okay, I need to capture this ARP on the audio track. I need to capture this sort of noise and stuff on this audio track. I've already recorded the bass line unless it's MIDI, so let me record the audio. And so I start to put all that together, package it into the force, right? And then once I got it packaged, I'll start breaking pieces out and say, this is going to be the intro. I'll delete everything else on that scene. You know what I mean? And so the idea for me is to be able to compose the same way I perform the same way I compose, but being able to record all of that stuff, whether it's CV, whether it's MIDI, whether it's audio, all into one device. I got to a show one time with the Force. Myself and Shiro, Voltage Controller, were performing. We were opening up for Jay Electronica from Rock Nation, which was pretty dope. I mean, he's a supporter of the ModBap movement. And so we went and we performed there. But here's the funny thing. We should make this into an actual, somebody should film this. So we're walking down the alley behind the freaking club, and we both have our 6U Eurorack under our arms. And we're just talking and walking down the alley. And it was weird. It was nighttime and two dudes with Eurorack systems under their arms going into a hip hop club. And so we walked in and I, had my case and my Eurorack system, and we both had that. Shiro already had his stuff set up. He met me out in the alley so I could park and, show me where to come in. And we went in, and the sound guy was like, what you gonna do with that? And I was like, this, I said, this is a Eurorack system. He's like, yo, man, I know it's a Eurorack system. That's a modular synth. But where you going to put it? There ain't no room for all of that. You know what I mean? And so me and Shiro looked at each other, and I was like, I'm take my shit back to the car. So I took it, I put it in the trunk, and Shiro went back in and got his stuff, and he decided what he was going to use or what he was not going to use, and he took his rack back to the car too. So then we were left with our groove boxes. However, there's enough stuff on my Force that, it was a little more stripped down, and I had less options for, the dynamics of my set, bringing things in, fading things out, and all those kinds of things. But still, it was a hip hop crowd, and stripped down set was perfect. And it still sounded like ModBap because, like I said, I could turn these things off and still have full beats. It's just that I embellish a lot with other stuff, And otherwise, these are just kind of simple. Right? It's just kind of simple and laid back. But then I may add stuff from the rack that I bring, right? So that whole idea, like that's all premeditated and pre-thought out because of these experiences that I've had. And also there was a time, and I think this was really the night before we opened up for Jay Electronica, and I have this recorded too, the video. And so I didn't have a power strip, but I had the Force, and I had my rack, and it was all routed, like I mentioned to you, but I had them plugged into different power. And the way the rack was sitting kind of angled up, it was putting a little stress on the power cord. And exactly 6 minutes into a 25-minute set, the power came out of the Eurorack case. And so I was left with, what do you do? I was left with this sort of thing. And I had my 404, so I was just kind of like, I started doing that, and then I latched that effect on and just messed with the knobs while I was over here plugging the damn thing back in. Right. But for me, although that's such a simple thing, and I find it fun to manipulate drum beats with effects, it came in handy for me for it to feel like a seamless recording. And that's probably not the question, but just kind of the idea is through those experiences and through all of this stuff is premeditated. So I know that however I'm composing in the studio is going to come in handy live, but it helps for me to be able to capture all of that stuff into the Force and then decide how I'll embellish what I've captured when I'm live.
Nice.
And I think Scott had a question, but I've been talking for too long.
Oh, no worries. I was just wondering, I had heard you say you'd been in IT for a while. So was that like a pretty natural transition to writing the software for the performer? And has that been like a good experience, or has it been a distraction from making music?
I wish I had a cool story to be able to say like, no, man, I just kind of take a couple hours when I'm at work and I program all kinds of stuff, but nope, none of that. I'll tell you what my background is. I've been doing IT since maybe 97, and I have a degree in electronics, a degree in technical management. So it's an associate's degree in electronics, a bachelor's degree in technical management, a master's degree in project management. And so I do IT management, and I don't remember any of the electronics. And so I outsource everything. And I just use my project management experience. Because listen, I looked at it like when I decided that I wanted to start designing modules, I could take the time to dust off the old skill and relearn that stuff, or just kind of remind myself and dig back in. But I felt like that would take 2 or 3 years to really get good and design good stuff. And I got no time for it. I think the key, for me, if I looked at it like, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to put your ego away and decide what you need to outsource, and decide what's going to be the most expedient and efficient way to, reach your goal. And my goal was to get a dope product in my rack and then into the market. So I didn't even bother dealing with all of that. I went to somebody that deals with that on a day-to-day basis. You know what I mean?
That makes sense, because you were still making music, right? And suddenly the performer came out. So I was like, how the hell did he do that?
Yeah.
That's smart.
Yeah, I just kind of, I partnered with some good people, and these are my designs. Like I said, there's other stuff that I have that's being worked on as well. And so I have this whole kind of product line of designs, and it's not just, some Crayola drawing. It's like mock-ups with instructions for what every button and what every interaction will do. And it's funny, when I went to the guys that I linked up with, they were like, yo, we do development for people. Even some of the biggest companies that we've done development for didn't come with this kind of information and this kind of mock-up and this kind of detail. But I also attribute that to the, that background that I just explained. You know what I mean? So yeah, it wouldn't have happened if I decided that I needed to do it all myself. And I don't think it would be as good, quite frankly. I just think you really have to. And I learned that from being an artist too, that like you can make the beats, or you could probably do some mastering or some mixing and stuff. But I remember making an album and I mixed it, and it was the biggest freaking headache to mix that album. It was a hip hop album with vocals and guest appearances and tracks from me and tracks from this guy. Now I've gotten sitting here mastering that. I ended up buying new monitors. I realized, I couldn't even hear anything before. So then I got better. And, it just took me a long time to get through a process that if I actually had funds to be able to go to the expert, it probably would have sounded better. It didn't sound bad, but I'm sure it would have sounded better. And then I took that and went to a mastering engineer, and he was able to get through so quickly and so much better with the equipment and stuff. So I learned from that. And when it came to these kinds of projects, it's just like, yo, you can't do everything yourself. Put the ego away. And I try not to have ego about things anyway. But the reality is sometimes you have to have a little self-talk to say, get the right experts and you'll be happy for it. And then I can like I say, I do IT management, so I can manage a project. I'm not afraid to assert myself on what my vision is. And it's my funding too, right? So I'm not afraid to assert myself on what that all is. So I had to do it that way, else it wouldn't have gotten done.
Well, and it sounds like at the end of the day, you ended up with exactly what you wanted faster anyways, right?
Yeah, certainly, without a doubt. Even with setbacks, because, I was supposed to have a prototype of the performer. Where were we going? Was it Traversy? Where were we going? And what was is a synth booth? No, super booth.
Yeah, we were
Super
supposed
booth.
to go to Super Booth last year. We were flying together. Yep.
Yeah. And so I was supposed to have a prototype, and then COVID hit and all kinds of things, factories and stuff shut down. And so I didn't have a prototype until months later, and everything was canceled at that point anyway. So, we just kind of worked through it, and I was still able to get it announced and released by October 10th. So it was really just about working through it, working with what I had to work with, and trusting who I was working with, and them trusting me and being able to come up with something.
I really appreciate what you just said. You're making me feel better about, my mom always has this expression, you can't dance at every wedding. And it's only as I've gotten older that I know what she's talking about. It's like, if I only have a few hours on a weekend, I'm at a point now, it's like, well, I want to make music, but I don't know enough about EQ. I don't know enough about mixing and mastering, and I'm trying to learn it all. And instead I'm learning nothing because you try to spread yourself too thin. So you're saying what you just said makes me feel much better about, when time comes for me to make an album, to outsource some of that stuff to
Yeah,
people
I think you kind of
really know what they're doing.
Yeah, you kind of have to balance that stuff, man. I mean, and it's a lesson that you may have to learn or teach yourself or open your eyes to every single time too. I can't say that, I learned this 10 years ago and every time I'm right on. No, because sometimes you just want to get stuff out, and sometimes I'll think like, I don't care, I'm just going to put it like this. Then something happens and I'm like, man, you got to make it right.
Yeah.
So, it was the same thing. Traversy knows, as I was putting together this compilation, the Modbap compilation, Digging in the Wires, joint has 20 tracks on it. And it's a double LP. Well, I had myself and Upright did the mastering for it, but then I was like, this sounds good, but I really feel like I wouldn't be pleased unless it was actually mastered by someone who does mastering. And while the mastering that we'd done was decent, like I said, I just really wanted to, there's 18 other people on this record, right? And so I really wanted to give everybody the best opportunity to shine. And that's one of those moments where you have to sidestep yourself and say, okay, stiff arm what I was thinking about. And if you really want to do this project and give all these people an opportunity, then you should probably get a real mastering engineer. And Traversy and I are talking all the time anyway. So she recommended somebody, and now I'm like best friends with the guy. And he mastered the crap out of the thing. So, yeah.
Would you mind if sharing that person's name? If
sure,
somebody,
Nathan Moody.
Oh, sure, yeah, okay. I had a feeling it might be Nathan. Yeah,
cool. Nathan's a great dude, and he's helped me out a lot. He's already mastered, since that project, he's already mastered 3 other projects for me. So,
that's awesome.
All to be released at some point here soon.
Nice. Just want to touch base with everybody in the group, see if you have any questions. Go ahead and unmute yourselves. And
I have a random question, just because quantizers are on my mind today. You use them? Do you in your Eurorack stuff, or is most of your tuning and done?
It's kind of all done by ear, and I don't know if that's a wow or. I really feel like I just haven't used quantizers much, and I like just kind of going by ear.
Yeah.
But then it also makes it kind of tough I don't tune any of these things. I just kind of tune them. Well, not with any tool, you know what I mean? And so I just kind of go by ear and tune them to what I'm hearing. And like I said, I like a certain amount of dissonance that could be a veiled cop out just because, But yeah, I don't use quantizers often. Oh, actually, there's a lot of stuff in the chat. Did I miss anything going on?
I do have a question for you. 2 things actually. So when you talk first about the quantizing, but you do send volts per octave from your force.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're tuning, like when you're playing a show, for example, and you have the surface, do you mess then with the pitch knob often, or do you find your pitch for that show and then let the CV, the volts per octave, do the talking?
The latter. The latter, yeah. I set it all up, and then that's what I'm using. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I don't really go too crazy with it from there because I guess because of the way I set up my performance projects on the Force. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm kind of staying in the same keys and stuff. And, so it's easy to kind of set it by ear to, I'll have the melody playing and I'll actually have the audio from the previous session. Then I'll have the CV playing into a module and I'll just kind of match it by ear. Like, okay, that's pretty close to what it needs to be. Now, as I go through these different scenes, everything typically just matches up and works out.
Right. So that's really important, I just want to let, kind of make a point about that because maybe you're not, because that would be really difficult for you to just be tuning multiple voices, like literally touching that pitch knobs of everything per song on the fly. That would just
that doesn't work for me. Now, I will say that I've been thinking through a process of how to do something that actually Ali Modular, Ali the architect, he does. To have melodic elements that are coming from the same modules that sound different key, different settings and everything. Mm-hmm. And so I've been thinking through the process and I just haven't gotten there yet, but having something like that stores voltages. And I actually have a couple things like that. I just haven't taken the time to really practice my set and practice composing a whole set with something like that. But like I was saying, Ali, the architect, does it pretty well with voltage block, where he literally uses voltage block to save presets. And so as he's going through the tracks the same way I do with the Force, as he's going through a different sequence in the MPC Live, he will find a point to transition and hit a button on the voltage block that changes the preset on the modules. And so now this next track sounds like a different track and doesn't have similar, it's not necessarily sounded similar to the last thing, right? So for me, I guess I get around some of that by, typically I'm recording those things and I'm making tracks on different days. If you told me today that we're going to do a show on, say, June 9th, I'd probably sit here and start making the project now. Like I'd go in and this weekend, I'd probably make 2 or 3 tracks. I'd come back. I hardly ever turn anything off. So I'd probably come back after me and my wife and daughter watch TV and I'd make a couple more tracks. And next weekend or through the week, I might sit and make a track. And over time, I'll build up like 10 tracks in one project. 12 tracks, 15 tracks in one project. Then I'll start to arrange those, like I said. And so through that process, I'm actually obviously changing all of those settings and creating things, but I'm also capturing the audio and leaving the CV intact and capturing the audio, leaving CV intact. So I haven't necessarily, I guess I haven't had the huge motivation to go back and figure out, the whole preset saving at Eurorack. And I guess there's not much to figure out. I get how it's done, but I just haven't put the time in to work it out in my setup.
Right. I mean, I think essentially you sort of are by using, the clips, CV, because like once you tune your oscillator, to the right pitch, and then as you move through your clips, it's jumping to those specific notes.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So the other thing that I would say is one thing that's key in the way I compose is clock to all of that crap over there. I mean, and I'm sure we all have our crosses to bear when it comes to syncing up everything. But if I can't send clock to that big case, it's almost useless to me because hip hop is a synchronized sort of a syncopated is what I was trying to say. Syncopated sort of music. Like it's very like, right? Just like, techno or anything else, it's just the drum beats have different pattern styles than that genre. So the idea is I love a bit of dissonance. I love a bit of random and probability. And I love just kind of being able to hold on to the clock, but being able to kind of let things bloom and blossom a little bit and kind of go off and go on. And plus my beats are wonky anyway, right? But yeah, the clock is what really kind of saves me with a lot of the stuff. If I can send, once I figured out with my MPCX that, all right, this has 8 CV out, and I'm gonna make number 8 the clock. And so every sequence, track number 8 is the clock, and I know that out of CV out number 8, that's going to be a clock. Then I'll send that to Tempe, and so then I have 6, clocks that'll come out of here, and I'll clock everything from that. So yeah, Christian.
Cool, thanks. I'm curious because I'm not familiar with the Force. Is there anything you would say that you miss or that you would want to have on it? Like so much you do with it?
Well, I would probably say if this was a year ago, I'd probably have 5 things or something. But Akai is good about, well, I shouldn't say that. Akai is always working on updates, not so good about releasing updates. And so since I, from time to time, do testing for them, I'm privy to what's coming. But the things that have been released over the last year or so have made the Force, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, a force to be reckoned with. Because you have a device here that has MIDI in, out. You have 4 CV, assignable CV, so they could be CV or gate or all CV. You have a song mode, which it didn't have before. The fact that I have MIDI and CV is a huge deal because I can take these 4 CV and do whatever I want to do with them. But then it has MIDI too, so I can run MIDI to things like Mutant Brain or Poly in Poly 2 and take control of everything in my studio. The big update that they did, I think it was called Multi MIDI. That was in the update before the song mode update. So Multi MIDI allows you to use, hold on a second.
While you're pulling that up, Corey, too, I want to add to his question, since you're going through, is so because if you use one of the CV tracks as clock, can you not solo then? Because it will essentially stop sending.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Solo.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem.
Right. Okay.
I do wish it had a dedicated clock out, but I learned to deal with it. And sometimes I use it as a performance element. Excuse me. Well, I'll have things being clocked, and then I'll just mute the track that's sending clock and let things go wild for a minute and then unmute. Right. And it brings it back in. So I use that to my advantage, quite frankly. But the multi MIDI thing, I was going to show you this MIDI device that I have here by Conductive Labs. But the idea of the Force having multi MIDI means that you can have up to 32 MIDI over CV devices. I mean, MIDI over USB devices. So you can have a hub with all of your USB MIDI synths or drum machines and plug that to the back of the Force. And now you have all of this stuff. Hold on. I can't show you the other thing, but if you can see the screen a little bit anyway. If I go to MIDI. So I have all of these MIDI devices are connected. I don't know what other device does this besides MPC, but that's all Akai anyway. But the idea of having that kind of power, like before, so this was a big update for me, being able to use all of my MIDI devices over USB, plug a USB hub in there up to 32 MIDI devices. And all you have to do is come in here and then click sync, and they all get clocked. Right. And then, so, I mean, that was kind of a eureka moment when they did that. So like I said, if you would ask me that about a year ago, I probably would have said it'd be nice to have song mode. It'd be nice to be able to connect more MIDI devices. It'd be nice to, you know what I mean? So forth and so on. But I think as they've updated it, it's kind of become my ultimate composition machine.
Nice.
That looks pretty cool.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks.
Did somebody?
No, just wanted to say thanks. It's looks really cool. Yeah.
So by using the force send, Corey, if you wanted to, it leaves you open to, you could add like another, like, because the force has VSTs like synths in it. So if you wanted to improvise and, you know, impulsively add another instrument to your set and kind of play that as improv, that's not maybe your Eurorec, you could do that as well, right?
Yeah, and it's pretty simple. Like, for instance, so I have this thing here. I'll turn it down just a little bit so you can also hear my voice. So I'm playing this little intro to the next beat, but if I decided, you know what, I want to improvise over that, and I don't have a synth here anywhere, I could just go and add a new track, a new plugin, open that up, and then I have access to these plugins here. So I can go to Hype, and I think if I do Shift Clip, you get the interface for it. If I go to Note, it turns it into right, and then I got presets there. And that's a soft synth, and it's built in there. So now I have a track with a soft synth on it that I can then record bits and pieces to the sequence. And the other thing cool about that is that if I play those notes in there, I can then copy that to the CV track. Like I can take this is the plug-in here. I'll stop that because it's distracting me anyway. This is the plug-in track. If I recorded some notes in there, I could take that and copy it to the CV track, and all of a sudden have the exact same thing playing out of my Eurorack. And so it's just a super, super flexible device that way.
Nice. Very cool. I just want to check in with everyone. It's almost noon. I know we got Modular World starting tonight or today, and just make sure you have any more questions. And Corey, I just want to thank you seriously for coming here and like really breaking down your setup and talking us through it. I found it to be extremely helpful and enlightening. So.
Oh yeah, it was my pleasure. I appreciate all of y'all. And that's really the first time I've talked that in depth about my setup. So, you know, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Corey. No, that was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. You ever combine? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Stu. Stu, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, how often are you using both Eurorack and that Moog One at the same time?
Kind of often, actually. It's when I got the Moog One, I kind of removed all other synths besides the hydro. I want to be able to show you my desk here. So let's see what we got. It's a pretty big desk, right?
Yeah.
It's a 7 or 8 foot IKEA table, dining room table. And so I sit dead center here. And then Eurorack takes it to the side. And I had the force sitting from this edge, taking up all the way, like it was really taking up everything on the desk. But what I noticed is I had all this crap behind me. I won't say crap because I still have those scents. And some of them are my favorite scents. I had all of those scents behind me, and I wasn't using them because of the one. What I kept doing was saying, I have the JX3P back there. Let me see if I can make some of those patches out from the one. And I could. And then I'm like, I have the...
Wait, Corey, I think you have a little bit of a delay right now happening. I don't know. Does anybody else?
You do too, Traversy. I noticed it when you were speaking last time.
Hey.
Anyone talking like might want to mute, like Ed, I think you might be causing the feedback.
Hello. Yeah.
Oh, Ed.
Yeah, anyway, long story short, it's just that I kept challenging myself to make presets from the synths that I had already. on the one, and it either got really close or dead on. And then I just started thinking like, yo, this is 3 huge analog synths in one. 3 sequences, 3 arps, you know what I mean? 3 analog sequences, and it's the 16 voice. So it really just came down to, I don't need all of these different things.
Yeah. It's funny. I have a one as well. And sometimes in most of my Eurorack performances, it's off screen, but every once in a while I'll put my hand over there and play a chord. And somebody inevitably be like, what module did you use for that? Like,
That's right. Yeah.
The big one.
That's right. Yeah. Because it's really like a huge flexible modular system disguised as an analog synth. So yeah, I use them both. And because I also like chords and stuff like that. I was just telling somebody the other day, when I'm making Modbap, I'm really trying to channel A Tribe Called Quest, and you know what I mean, and Pete Rock and Jay Dilla and stuff like that. And that really, they pulled from jazz quite a bit. So that's why I love those lush chords and then all of that stuff. So yeah, I use it quite a bit with the Eurorack.
Very cool.
Totally.
Yeah, I dug the deep dive with Lisa Belladonna that you both did. That was great.
Yeah, she's dope.
Yeah. One other thing you mentioned too that I just want everyone to kind of think about as you're building your setups to play, especially if you're thinking about playing out, and you mentioned it too, is size, and places not always being accommodating of your setups. If you play like Modular World, or when Jono, or when we do our meetups, and usually like synth, like modular situations, they know, so they accommodate what you want to bring, and they, it's very welcoming. But when you start playing outside of this realm of this lovely synth fam world that we created, and you start thinking about like clubs or warehouses, or like different stages, there comes limitations, especially as you're coming up. Eventually you may get to a place where whatever you ask for on your rider you will get, but there's that in between period, and there's that's thinking about what it is you're bringing, what's your footprint that you're creating on that table. Even if you could carry it, what I mean, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy in some situations for you to set it up. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I forgot about that J Electronic.
What's interesting about that weekend is the J Electronic show was on a Sunday, and the show that was that Saturday was at an electronic music store. And I'm sorry, I'm not good at Noisebug. Hello.
Noisebug.
We performed at Noisebug. And it was actually a nice turnout there. I didn't really expect many people to be at Noisebug, and but it was a nice turnout. You couldn't have more different environments. You know what I mean? So I did the same set at those 2 shows that weekend. Saturday is the time when my Eurorack joint fell out, the power fell out, and I had to put it back together, and I still was able to get through. But see, that was the home team, the nerd set. and they were there for all of the bleeping and blopping and all of the knobs and all of the buttons and levers that I could pull and push and plug. They were there for that. And the next night was, I cannot remember the name of the club, but anyway, it was a club in West Hollywood.
I think.
Troubadour, yes, hello. So it was the Troubadour, and it was a straight up hip hop crowd with J Electronica there, and there was some other hip hop acts opening. And, we were really being treated weird that night too. And I don't know if it was just kind of like, I don't know what these weird synth dudes are here to do.
No, that's pretty normal about clubs and sound guys.
Yeah. Well, even the manager was kind of like, y'all going first, then we got these rappers and all this other stuff that's going to happen. And J Electronica told the dude, like, they go on just before me. Everybody else, and then them, then me. You know what I mean? And so the interesting thing about that is that obviously we did the same set, but it was, sans Eurorack. but still same set in the box. And it was so the day before I did the same set with the Euro rack and it was more embellished and you know what I mean? But then it was more stripped down for this club. And I mean, I think you spoke to that perfectly. It's just, you just never know depending on the place you're going to go. Here I am 2 days in a row performing the same set, but having to do it differently and still having to hit the mark and play to the crowd.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up because it's so true. Like there's been places where I've shown up and like you have to just make it work. You know, I'm playing in between DJs and they just have a different objective. And then there are other times when I've played warehouse clubs where I get like an hour sound check and they make all the space, you know, but it's not always like that, you know, depending on where you're getting booked, if you're, you know, the support or if you're the headliner, and in that case it's a different conversation. So I'm glad you brought that up because it is something to think about as everyone starts to build those things and want to start taking things out, like
No doubt.
yeah. But does anybody have any other questions for Corey? Well, we have him here. All right. Well, okay, then I'm going to say thank you. Yes, and give you a big round of applause, Corey.
Thank you. Round of applause for you guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm going to stop recording now. So let me just do that.